Nobody in Black Hollow trusted the sound of motorcycles after dark. In that town, engines didn't mean freedom, adventure, or the romance of the open road. They meant trouble. They meant broken windows, bar fights, police lights in the distance, and mothers calling their children indoors before sunset. People there had long ago learned to lock their doors when they heard a pack coming down the highway. And when the riders wore black leather, heavy boots, and patches stitched with names whispered more than spoken, even the bravest men found reasons to lower their eyes. That was why no one expected a man like Zeke Mercer to have a daughter like Lily. Zeke was the kind of biker people crossed the street to avoid. 6'4", broad as a barn door, with silver threaded through his beard and old scars running like faded lightning across his knuckles, he looked as if he had been carved out of iron and smoke. He rode at the front of a feared motorcycle brotherhood known as the Iron Vultures, a club whose name carried weight from one county line to the next. Zeke had spent most of his life earning a reputation no one dared question. Men moved when he entered a room. Deputies watched him longer than necessary. Gas station cashiers smiled too quickly and never met his eyes. But every Friday afternoon, Zeke Mercer picked up his 10-year-old daughter from school himself. He arrived on the same old black Harley, engine rumbling low at the curb while parents in SUVs pretended not to stare. He never entered the schoolyard. He simply waited by the gate, gloved hands resting on the bars, eyes hidden behind dark lenses. And every Friday, Lily came running with a bright backpack bouncing against her shoulders, her face lighting up in a way that made the terrifying man on the motorcycle seem, for just a second, like nothing more dangerous than a father trying to make it through another week. Lily was the only soft thing in Zeke's life. Her mother had died 5 years earlier from an illness that arrived quietly and left like a storm. Since then, Zeke had raised Lily alone in a small house just outside town, close enough to Black Hollow to get groceries, far enough to keep his enemies from counting windows. He did not know how to braid hair very well, but he learned. He burned pancakes for 3 straight months before figuring out the stove. He kept a photo of Lily in the inside pocket of his cut, over his chest, where his brothers kept extra cash, cigarettes, or old memories they didn't talk about. To the world, Zeke Mercer was a biker legend with blood in his past and danger in his shadow. To Lily, he was just Dad. And Lily, unlike the town, was not afraid of much. She had inherited her mother's wide, curious eyes and a stubbornness that could have challenged a hurricane. She talked to stray cats, asked inconvenient questions in church, and had once told a substitute teacher that being loud was not the same thing as being right. She was smart in a way that made adults nervous, and kind in a way that made them protective. Zeke never let her ride without a helmet, never let strangers too close, and never lied to her when she asked whether people were afraid of him. "Are they?" she had once asked, sitting on the kitchen counter while he burned toast. Zeke had looked at her over his shoulder. "Some are. Should they be?" That had taken longer to answer. "Not you," he said at last. She seemed to think about that very seriously, then nodded as though she had accepted a legal agreement. "Okay." Black Hollow watched them the way small towns always watch what they don't understand. The whispers never stopped. Some people said Zeke had once broken a man's jaw with a wrench. Others said he had protected a widow from a foreclosure collector by standing on her porch until the man drove away shaking. Some swore he dealt in things no decent person would name. Others quietly admitted that when a woman's ex-husband started stalking her, it was Zeke who made the problem disappear without police paperwork or further questions. People feared him because fear was easier than nuance. And Zeke preferred it that way. The one person in town who had no use for fear was 17-year-old Noah Grayson. Noah lived with his grandmother above a hardware store on Main Street. His parents were ghosts of the ordinary kind, his father gone before memory, his mother gone into addiction and then into silence. His grandmother, Ruth, had done everything she could with too little money and not enough time, and Noah had grown into the sort of boy hardship sometimes creates, quiet, observant, and older than his age in all the worst places. He worked part-time unloading feed trucks, fixed bicycles for neighborhood kids for free, and had a habit of stepping into problems that were not technically his but felt morally impossible to ignore. He was not reckless. That was what made him unusual. He understood fear perfectly. He simply refused to let it make his decisions for him. He first met Lily on a Wednesday afternoon in late October, outside the town library. She was sitting on the curb beside her bicycle, trying very hard not to cry over a chain that had slipped loose and wrapped itself into a greasy metal knot. Her school uniform cardigan had one sleeve inside out. Her backpack lay open beside her, papers nearly blowing away in the wind. Noah had been walking home with a bag of nails and some motor oil for the store when he noticed the disaster scene. "You're going to lose your homework," he said. Lily looked up at him with immediate suspicion. "I know." Noah crouched, caught a sheet before it skated into the gutter, and handed it back. "Need help?" "I can do it." "Sure." That irritated her. "I can." "I didn't say you couldn't. I said, do you need help?" She narrowed her eyes, studying him. Then, with the reluctant dignity of someone accepting rescue only under protest, she moved her bike slightly toward him. "The chain hates me." Noah smiled despite himself. "That's probably personal." It took him less than 3 minutes to fix it. Lily watched with intense concentration, as if trying to memorize the process in case she needed to prove later that she had not been helpless. When he was done, he wiped his hands on a rag from his pocket and spun the pedals once. "There," he said. Lily stood and inspected the work. "You're good at that." "I've had practice." She hesitated, then offered her hand the way adults did. "I'm Lily." Noah shook it carefully. "Noah." From down the street came the low thunder of a motorcycle engine. Lily's face changed instantly, brightening. Noah turned as the black Harley rolled up to the curb. Zeke Mercer cut the engine and took in the scene in one sweep: the bike, the grease, the teenage boy standing too close to his daughter. Noah felt the weight of that look physically. Lily, however, ran straight to him. "Dad, my chain came off and Noah fixed it." Zeke dismounted slowly. He was even larger up close. "Did he?" It was not a question. It was an assessment. Noah stood his ground. "Yeah." For a long second, Zeke said nothing. Then he stepped closer, looked at the repaired chain, and gave one short nod. "Good work." Noah had expected suspicion, maybe a threat disguised as gratitude. Instead there was only that nod, brief, controlled, real. Somehow that was more unsettling. Lily beamed as if she had personally negotiated peace between nations. "See? I told you." Zeke looked at her. "Told me what?" "That not everyone in this town is scared of you." The silence that followed was so sharp Noah almost laughed. Zeke removed his gloves finger by finger. "Get your backpack." Lily rolled her eyes and obeyed. Before leaving, she turned to Noah. "Thanks again." Noah lifted a hand. "Try not to declare war on the chain next time." She smiled. Zeke didn't. But just before swinging onto the bike, he looked at Noah once more and said, "Stay out of trouble." Noah answered before thinking. "You too." For the first time, something like amusement flickered in Zeke Mercer's face. That should have been the end of it. In towns like Black Hollow, lives touch briefly and drift apart all the time. But after that day, Noah ran into Lily more often than chance should have allowed. At the hardware store with her grandmother's shopping list. At the gas station buying candy she was probably not supposed to have. Outside the school fence waiting for Zeke, book in hand, legs swinging from the curb like she owned the world. She talked easily, as children sometimes do when they sense someone is safe. Noah never encouraged it much, but he never shut it down either. She asked what he wanted to do after graduation. He said leave. She asked where. He said anywhere with fewer people who treated ambition like betrayal. She considered that deeply. One afternoon she asked, "Why aren't you afraid of my dad?" Noah had been tightening the bolts on her front wheel while she sat on the sidewalk eating gumdrops one color at a time. "Who says I'm not? You talk to him normally. That doesn't mean I'm not careful." She kicked her heel against the curb. "He's not bad." Noah glanced up. "I didn't say he was. But everybody acts like he is." Noah straightened, wiping his hands. "Sometimes people decide who someone is because it's easier than admitting they don't know." Lily looked pleased by that answer, though she probably would not have explained why. That sounded smart. "Don't tell anyone." By November, Zeke had noticed the pattern. He didn't mention it the first few times. He simply watched. Noah fixed Lily's bike twice more, walked her across Main Street once when traffic got stupid around the feed store, and once returned a library book she had left on a bench outside the diner. Nothing inappropriate. Nothing dramatic. But Zeke Mercer had not survived his life by ignoring repeated details involving the only person he loved more than breathing. So on a cold Friday evening, after picking Lily up from school, he parked outside the hardware store and waited while Noah locked up. Noah came down the steps carrying a metal toolbox and stopped when he saw him. Zeke remained seated on the Harley. "You helping my kid because you're kind," he said, "or because you're stupid?" Noah blinked once. "Those aren't the only options. Answer the question." Noah set the toolbox down. "She needed help. That all?" "Yeah." Zeke watched him. "You want something from me?" "No." "From her?" "No." "From the club?" That almost made Noah laugh. "Definitely no." The corner of Zeke's mouth moved, not quite a smile. "Good." Noah folded his arms. "You ask everybody this many questions?" "Only the ones around my daughter." The answer was so direct that Noah respected it immediately. "Then ask one back." Zeke's eyes narrowed slightly. "What? Why do you let her talk to me if you don't trust anybody?" For a long moment, the biker said nothing. The streetlight hummed above them. Somewhere down the block, a dog barked behind a fence. Then Zeke said, "Because she trusts you." That answer stayed with Noah longer than he liked. So did what came next. Winter was pressing in fast that year, and with it came the sort of tension that settles over towns before something bad happens. Men at the diner lowered their voices when certain trucks passed by. Two unfamiliar faces started appearing outside the liquor store across from Main. Ruth Grayson began locking the door upstairs before sunset. Even Lily seemed to notice something in the air, though Zeke tried to keep her away from club talk, away from business, away from the names of men who smiled with too many teeth. The Iron Vultures had a rival problem. Not local. Worse. A violent crew from across the state line called the Red Knives had started pushing into their routes: fuel theft, intimidation, small-town shakedowns, and eventually open threats. Zeke had spent weeks trying to keep it from spilling into Black Hollow, but men like the Red Knives did not respect boundaries unless they were written in blood. Meetings got longer. Riders started patrolling at night. Lily was told not to answer the door to anyone but Noah, Ruth, or one of three named club brothers she already knew. She had noticed that too. At dinner one night she asked, "Are we in danger?" Zeke, standing at the stove with a pan of eggs, went still. "A little," he said. "From the bad bikers?" He turned to look at her. "Who said we're the good bikers?" Lily considered that. "You pick me up from school and make bad eggs. That seems pretty good." Zeke laughed then, one short, unwilling laugh that cracked through the weight hanging over the house. He set the pan down and walked over to press a hand gently to the top of her head. "If anything ever feels wrong," he said, "you go where?" She answered immediately. "Ruth's store. Or Noah. And then? And then I stay there." He nodded. "Good. She looked up at him. Dad? Yeah. Are you scared? That question, from anyone else, might have offended him. From her, it nearly broke him. Yes, he said. Lily reached across the table and took his scarred hand in both of hers. Me too. The next week, the trouble came to town. Not loudly at first. Not with engines and guns and movie scene chaos. Trouble almost never arrives looking cinematic. It arrives looking ordinary enough to be missed until it is too close. It was a Thursday. School let out under a sky the color of dirty steel. Zeke was late, only 10 minutes, but 10 minutes was enough to unsettle Lily because her father was never late on Thursdays. She stood at the gate with her backpack on, watching the curb. Noah happened to be nearby after dropping off parts at the auto shop around the corner. When he saw her alone, he crossed the street. "Your dad late?" he asked. She nodded. "That's weird." Noah looked up and down the road. Something prickled in him instantly. Maybe it was the empty feeling of the street. Maybe the black SUV idling half a block away. Maybe just the accumulated unease everyone in town had been pretending not to feel. "We'll wait by the store," he said. Lily frowned. He said here. "Then he can find you 20 feet away." She opened her mouth to argue. That was when the SUV doors opened. 3 men got out. They weren't wearing colors, but they carried the unmistakable posture of men who had spent too long learning how to hurt other people in groups. One of them looked directly at Lily. Another scanned the street. The third smiled. Noah didn't wait for certainty. "Run," he said. Lily froze for half a second. Then Noah grabbed her hand and pulled her toward the alley beside the bakery. Behind them, one of the men shouted. And from the far end of the street, finally, came the roar of a motorcycle engine, fast, furious, too late by seconds. That was the moment everything changed. That was the moment Black Hollow stopped being a town that whispered about bikers from behind closed doors and became the place where a boy would stand between violence and a biker's daughter. And before the next sunrise, the whole world around them would know his name. Noah did not think. Thinking was slower than danger, and danger was already moving. The alley beside the bakery was narrow, boxed in by wet brick walls, trash bins, and the sour smell of old flour and rainwater. Lily stumbled once on the cracked pavement, and Noah tightened his grip on her hand so hard she gasped. Behind them, heavy footsteps slapped the ground. One of the men shouted again, closer now, his voice carrying the kind of confidence that comes from believing the ending is already yours. "Keep going." Noah barked. "I can't run that fast." "Yes, you can." He did not know whether that was true. He only knew fear could become obedience if you gave it a command strong enough to hold on to. At the other end of the alley was a rusted chain-link gate that opened behind the old laundromat on Willow Street. Noah had cut through there 100 times. He knew the latch stuck in winter and the bottom corner snagged on the concrete. He knew if they made it through and crossed the street fast enough, Ruth's hardware store was less than 40 seconds away. 40 seconds, under normal conditions, was nothing. Under the kind of pressure now pouring into his bloodstream, it felt like crossing a continent on bleeding feet. He hit the gate first and yanked upward with his free hand. It jammed. Behind them, the footsteps were almost there. Lily made a sound Noah would remember in nightmares long after this day ended, not a scream, not yet, but the sharp, trapped inhale of a child who has just realized the world can become dangerous faster than adults promised. Noah slammed the latch again, harder. The gate popped loose. "Go," he shouted, shoving Lily through the opening. She stumbled out onto Willow Street and turned, panicked, as Noah tried to squeeze through behind her. One of the men lunged from the alley just as he did, catching the back of Noah's jacket with enough force to jerk him sideways. Noah twisted instinctively, half falling, half dragging the other man into the gate. Metal rattled violently. Lily screamed now, full volume, raw, terrified. The man smelled like gasoline and cigarettes. He was older than Noah by at least 20 years, his face hard and red from cold or drink or both. He drove a fist into Noah's ribs before the boy could fully recover. Pain exploded under Noah's arm. He nearly dropped, but adrenaline turned the hit into distance rather than collapse. "Run to Ruth," he shouted at Lily, even as the man grabbed for him again. She didn't move. Children are told to run in emergencies as though love obeys logic under pressure. But love, especially in the young, often freezes at the sight of someone else being hurt on your behalf. "Lily!" Noah roared. That did it. She turned and sprinted across the street, backpack bouncing wildly, braid coming loose over one shoulder. The second man came out of the alley then, saw her go, and broke into a run after her. Noah reacted before his pain had time to catch up. He drove his shoulder into the first man's chest, using momentum more than strength, and both of them crashed sideways into the brick wall. Skin tore off Noah's knuckles. The man cursed and swung again, clipping Noah's jaw hard enough to flash white through his vision. But it bought 1 second. Maybe 2. More than enough. From the far corner of Willow Street came the roar of Zeke Mercer's Harley like a storm breaking open at ground level. The bike appeared in a blur of black metal and fury, rear tires spitting grit as Zeke threw it sideways across the street and blocked the second man's path to Lily. He was off the machine before it had fully settled, moving with a speed that should not have belonged to someone his size. He hit the runner once, just once, with a force so absolute the man folded over the hood of a parked car like wet laundry. Lily collided with Zeke's side and clung there, sobbing. Zeke's eyes went to Noah instantly. That was when the third man emerged. He had circled wide from the front of the school and now came up from the opposite sidewalk with one hand inside his coat. Noah saw it before Zeke did. Gun. There are moments that divide a life into before and after so cleanly that every detail becomes permanent. Later, people will ask what you were thinking, and the truth will often be simpler and stranger than they expect. Noah did not think of bravery. He did not think of sacrifice or loyalty or whether the biker's daughter was worth dying for. He did not think of headlines or gratitude or the strange future that might follow one decision made too fast to name. He saw the gun coming up. He saw Lily pressed against her father's side. And he moved. Zeke. The shout tore from him as he launched forward. He hit Lily and Zeke both from the side, driving them down and away just as the gun fired. The sound cracked across Willow Street like the sky splitting. For one impossible instant, Noah felt nothing. Then heat ripped through his upper shoulder and spun him sideways onto the pavement. The world lost its shape. Lily screamed again. Zeke hit the ground hard, one arm locked around her, then came up with a sound that was not entirely human. He covered the distance to the shooter in 3 strides. The gunman tried to fire again and never got the chance. Zeke slammed into him with enough force to throw both men into the side of the SUV. Metal dented. Glass burst inward. The weapon skidded under a parked truck. People were shouting now. Doors were opening. Somewhere, finally, a woman yelled for someone to call 911 as if that should have been the first instinct rather than the 4th or 5th. Noah rolled onto his back and stared at the white winter sky. His shoulder was on fire. No, not his shoulder. Through it. Inside it. Around it. He put a hand there and when he brought it back it was red. He had seen blood before. He had cut himself fixing blades, torn skin on jagged metal, even broken his wrist at 14 falling from a shed roof. None of that prepared him for the intimate horror of seeing your own blood spread so quickly through your shirt like your body has decided to tell the world what happened before your mouth can. Lily dropped to her knees beside him. Noah, Noah, Noah. Her voice came in pieces. He tried to say something reassuring and instead coughed. Hey, he managed. You ran. She was crying so hard she could barely speak. You got shot. Yeah. He swallowed, dizzy. That seems bad. Zeke was still beating the shooter. Not wildly. Not out of control. Methodically. The kind of violence that comes from a man stepping into the room where his worst fear is waiting and deciding the room will not survive the meeting. 2 of the 3 attackers were down already, one unmoving by the curb, the other curled around a broken arm and making sounds like he was trying not to pass out. The shooter was on the ground beneath Zeke, trying to crawl and failing because Zeke kept dragging him back by the coat. Then Lily screamed, "Dad!" That sound reached him. Zeke froze. He turned. And saw the blood. Something changed in his face then that no one on Willow Street would ever forget. Not rage, though that was there. Not fear alone. Something deeper and more terrible. The look of a man realizing another person's child has just bled for his own. He crossed to Noah in an instant and dropped to one knee so hard the concrete cracked under the weight of him. His hands, which looked built for damage and had done more than enough of it today, became impossibly careful as they pressed against the wound. "Stay with me, kid." Noah laughed weakly through gritted teeth. "You always this friendly?" "Not the time." "Fair." Blood kept coming between Zeke's fingers. Not pumping, which was good in some abstract medical sense Noah could barely hold on to, but steady enough to turn everything cold around the edges. Sirens rose in the distance. Lily clutched Noah's good hand like she thought grip alone could keep him from floating away. "Look at me," Zeke ordered. Noah tried. His eyelids felt heavier than iron. "Look. At. Me." Noah focused on the biker's face. Scar over the brow. Silver in the beard. Eyes like banked fire. "Don't close up," Zeke said. "Not now. You sound mad at me." "I am mad at everybody." That made no sense and perfect sense at once. By the time the ambulance arrived, half the town had spilled onto the sidewalks. Some watched from porches. Some stood in clusters near the diner. Some were recording with phones until Zeke turned his head once and they thought better of it. The story had already started spreading in whispers before the paramedics even got Noah onto the gurney. The Grayson boy. Shot. Protecting Mercer's daughter. The Iron Vulture's president standing in the street with blood on his hands and his cut. Lily tried to climb into the ambulance after Noah and had to be physically pulled back by Zeke, who was himself barely holding together. Noah saw her crying as the doors closed and wanted, absurdly, to apologize for making her cry. Then the vehicle lurched forward, siren rising, and Black Hollow disappeared behind red light and winter glare. At the hospital, pain became structure. People often imagine emergency rooms as chaos, but real emergency medicine is organized urgency, repeated commands, clipped decisions, bright lights, paper wristbands, questions you answer before you know if they matter. Noah drifted in and out through all of it. Name. Age. Allergies. Where were you hit? Can you move your fingers? Stay awake. Stay with us. Pressure here. Cut this sleeve. Pulse dropping. No, holding. Bullet passed through. Lucky. Very lucky. Blood loss but manageable. Prep imaging. Call surgery if the scan shows fragmentation. Get me another set of vitals. He surfaced fully once when they cut away his shirt and the cold hit him. A nurse leaned over him. "Noah, can you tell me your full name?" He did. "Do you know where you are?" "Hospital." "Do you know what happened?" He blinked. "I made a really bad decision." The nurse almost smiled. "You made a fast one." That distinction followed him down into the dimmer hours. When he woke again, properly this time, the pain had become dense and local instead of everywhere at once. His shoulder was wrapped. His mouth tasted like copper and sleep. The room was dim except for the late afternoon light leaking through the blinds. For several seconds he had no idea what day it was. Then he saw Ruth. His grandmother sat in a chair by the bed in her heavy cardigan, hands folded around a paper cup she had clearly forgotten to drink. Her face was lined more deeply than usual, as if fear had gone through her with a knife and left visible marks. When she realized he was awake, she stood too quickly. "Oh, Noah." He tried to smile. "Hey, Gran." She pressed her lips together hard enough to make them disappear. "Do not hate me after being shot." He shut his eyes briefly. "Fair." She touched his hair back from his forehead with trembling fingers. Only then did he understand how frightened she had been. Ruth Grayson had lived through debt, abandonment, layoffs, eviction notices, surgeries, funerals, and the slow humiliation of growing old while still having to work. She did not scare easily. But this had scared her. That knowledge hurt almost as much as the wound. "I'm sorry," he said. "Don't apologize for bleeding," she snapped softly, then sat down before her knees gave out. "Apologize later for the gray hair." He looked toward the door. "Lily okay?" Ruth let out a slow breath. "She's fine." Shaken. Her father won't let her out of his sight. Noah nodded once. "Speaking of which," Ruth said, not quite able to keep the edge from her voice, "he's been out there for 3 hours." Noah turned his head. "Who?" "Don't be stupid while medicated." "Mercer." That got his attention. "He's here." "He was here before I got here." "And 2 more of his men after that. They are making the nurses nervous." Noah tried to picture the waiting room and nearly laughed, which hurt enough to stop him immediately. Ruth watched him carefully. "What exactly have you gotten yourself tied into, Noah?" He stared at the blanket for a second. "A kid needed help," he said. Ruth's expression shifted, still frightened, still frustrated, but threaded now with that painful, reluctant pride adults feel when the child they tried to protect turns out to have a conscience sharp enough to endanger himself. "Well," she muttered, eyes shining despite herself, "next time be a little less noble with your major arteries." The door opened before Noah could answer. Zeke Mercer entered like a man trying to make himself smaller and failing. Without his cut, he looked stranger somehow, less mythic and more exhausted. His knuckles were split. There was dried blood on the cuff of his shirt that was not all his. His eyes went immediately to Noah, as if checking for proof the boy was truly awake and not another thing he had arrived too late to save. Ruth stiffened. Zeke stopped just inside the room. "Ma'am." She gave him a look that could have peeled paint. "Mr. Mercer." Noah almost laughed again and wisely didn't. For several seconds no one spoke. Then Zeke said, "Can I have a minute?" Ruth looked at Noah. He gave a small nod. She rose slowly, leaned down to kiss Noah's forehead, and paused beside Zeke on her way out. "You keep your trouble away from my grandson." Zeke met her eyes. "I intend to." She held his stare a moment longer, then left. When the door shut, the silence in the room changed shape. Zeke stepped closer to the bed and stood there with both hands at his sides, like a man who had faced guns more calmly than this conversation. "You look terrible," Noah said. "That broke something." "Not fully. Not dramatically. But enough that the tension in Zeke's shoulders shifted from combat readiness into something more honest and far heavier. "You took a round for my kid." Noah swallowed. "Technically, I shoved you too." "Technically, shut up." Noah did, because it seemed wise. Zeke dragged a hand over his beard. "Doctors say you got lucky." "That's what they keep telling me." He nodded once. "You did." Noah looked at the bandaged shoulder. "Didn't feel lucky." "No." Zeke stepped closer. "It didn't." The biker was silent for so long Noah finally looked up at him fully. There was grief there. Not theatrical gratitude. Not masculine awkwardness trying on sincerity. Grief. The kind that arrives when a debt forms so large that even imagining repayment feels insulting. "I owe you," Zeke said. Noah shook his head slightly. "You don't." Zeke's expression hardened. "Don't tell me what I do and don't owe." "No, I mean. I know what you mean." His voice dropped lower. "And I'm telling you you're wrong." Noah stared at him. Zeke looked away once, toward the window blinds, then back. "You know what men like those were going to do if they got her." Noah did not answer. He didn't need to. Zeke continued, each word controlled with visible effort. "You knew, and you moved anyway." The room went very quiet. Noah had not let himself name it that clearly. During the chase it had been simpler to think run, gate, move, gun. But now, under the fluorescent softness of hospital light, the truth stood there in plain clothes. He had not only protected Lily from being taken. He had likely protected her from whatever message the red knives meant to send through a child's body. That realization turned his stomach colder than the blood loss had. "She's okay," he said finally. Zeke closed his eyes for the briefest second. "Because of you." The door opened again before Noah could answer, and Lily came in at a half-run despite the nurse trying to slow her. She had clearly cried until exhaustion hollowed her out. Her eyes were red, her braid gone completely loose, and she had changed into one of Zeke's flannel shirts over leggings because no one had thought to bring her home clothes. The moment she saw Noah awake, she burst into tears all over again. "Oh no," Noah murmured. "Not that." She came to the bedside and, after a brief hesitation about where not to hurt him, hugged him as carefully as a 10-year-old can manage. He stiffened from pain, then relaxed enough to lift his good arm around her shoulders. "You got shot," she said into the blanket. "Yeah, apparently that's the big story. You could have died." "I didn't." "That's not the point." Zeke made a sound suspiciously like he agreed with her. Noah looked over Lily's head at him. "Great. Now there are two of you." Lily pulled back just enough to glare through tears. "You're not funny." "I know. It's a medical issue." That got a broken laugh out of her, which seemed to help. She wiped her face with both hands and stood straighter. "Dad says the bad men are caught." "All of them?" Zeke answered. 2 in custody. 1 in surgery under guard. None going anywhere. Noah nodded. Lily looked at the bandage again and her mouth trembled. "I'm sorry." The words landed harder than any of them expected. Noah frowned. "For what? If you weren't my friend, this wouldn't have happened." The room tightened instantly. Zeke's jaw flexed. "Lily." But Noah got there first. "No." She blinked at him. "No," he repeated, firmer. "This happened because bad men made a bad choice. Not because you knew me." She tried to argue. "But." "No but. You don't carry their garbage." Zeke looked at him then with a strange, unreadable intensity, as if the words had struck somewhere in him too. Lily stared for another second, then gave one reluctant nod. Noah was tiring fast now. He could feel it in the heaviness settling behind his eyes, in the way each sentence took more effort than the last. The medication was rising again like deep water. Zeke noticed. "Of course he did. We'll let you rest." Noah nodded once. Lily squeezed his hand before stepping back. "I'm coming tomorrow." "You don't have school." She looked offended. "Obviously not." "Right." He let his eyes close for a second, then forced them open again. "Hey, Lily." "What?" "Next time your bike chain comes off, call literally anyone else." She almost smiled. Then she and Zeke left, and the room dimmed into silence except for the monitor's slow, artificial reassurance. Noah slept. Outside, however, Black Hollow did not. By sunset the story had crossed county lines. By midnight it had a life of its own. At the diner, men who had once muttered that the iron vultures were parasites now told the story with rough admiration. At the gas station, truckers repeated details they had already gotten wrong. On social media, the event spread in shaky phone clips: the ambulance lights, the dented SUV, the shattered glass, the giant biker kneeling in the street over a bleeding teenager while holding pressure on the wound with both hands. Someone posted a grainy still of Lily clinging to Noah beside the curb. Someone else named the red knives outright. Another post claimed the sheriff had nearly lost control of the scene because armed bikers were arriving at the hospital one by one to stand watch. That last part was true. The iron vultures did not make noise without purpose. They did not posture for attention the way younger clubs did. But by 10 that night, 3 bikes were parked outside the county hospital. By midnight, there were 12. By 2 in the morning, riders from neighboring chapters had begun appearing, men with cold eyes, road-worn faces, and patches older than some of the nurses. They did not crowd the doors. They did not shout. They stood outside in the dark, engines ticking cool, watching. The hospital security staff did not know what to do with that much quiet menace. The sheriff's department, already tangled in processing the attackers, wisely decided not to escalate a situation that was, for the moment, technically lawful. Inside the ICU step-down wing, Noah slept through most of it. Ruth did not. Around 1:30 in the morning she stepped out of Noah's room to stretch her legs and nearly stopped short at the sight of the hallway beyond the waiting area. Men in leather vests occupied nearly every chair. Some looked old enough to be grandfathers. Others were broad-shouldered and scarred and silent, their boots muddy from the road. Not one of them was speaking above a murmur. The vending machine near the corner had been emptied of half its contents. A nurse moved through them with the dazed expression of someone who could not decide whether she was witnessing a threat or an honor guard. At the center of it all sat Zeke Mercer. He was not lounging. Not commanding. Just sitting with elbows on his knees, hands clasped, eyes on the floor as though holding himself together required total concentration. Ruth had every reason to hate what he represented. But she had also seen the way he looked at Noah's room. She crossed the waiting area slowly. Several heads turned toward her and then respectfully away. Zeke rose when he saw her, which somehow made him seem even larger. "Ma'am." She studied him for a moment. "You've got half the underworld in my grandson's hallway." His gaze flicked around once. "Not half." Despite herself, Ruth almost smiled. That wasn't humor. "No." She folded her arms. "Are they all here because of Noah?" Zeke answered without hesitation. "Yes." Ruth let that sink in. All these men. All these engines out in the cold. All because one skinny 17-year-old with too much conscience had seen a gun and stepped the wrong direction. "Why?" she asked quietly. Zeke's face changed. Not softened, he did not seem built for softness, but stripped of some defensive layer he usually kept between himself and the world. "Because by dawn," he said, "every brother I've got wanted to stand for the kid who stood for my daughter." The word settled over the waiting room with a weight no one tried to interrupt. Ruth looked at the men again. At the patched vests. The scarred knuckles. The worn boots. The terrible reputations. The stillness. Then she looked back at Zeke Mercer. "He's just a boy." Zeke's eyes went toward Noah's door. "Not to us." Outside, one more motorcycle rolled into the hospital lot. Then another. And another. By first light, there would be 100. And Black Hollow would wake to find that the boy who got hurt saving a biker's daughter had not merely survived the night. He had become something far more dangerous and far more protected than anyone in town could yet understand. Black Hollow woke before sunrise without meaning to. The first people to notice were the insomniacs, the truckers on early routes, the women with newborns, the old men who still trusted dawn more than sleep. They heard the engines first, not roaring, not tearing through town like a threat, but arriving in measured waves from every road that led toward the county hospital. One after another. Then several at a time. Then in groups large enough to make windows tremble and porch lights quiver. By 6 in the morning, there were motorcycles lined along both sides of the street outside the hospital, spilling into the adjacent lot, stretching down the block like a black metal river that had chosen not to move. 100 riders. Some said more. No one was counting carefully enough to correct the legend before it became one. The Iron Vultures had come from 3 counties and 4 neighboring towns. Men with weathered cuts, road scars, gray in their beards, ink on their necks, old griefs in their posture, and silence in their eyes. They came alone, in pairs, in packs. They came on Harleys, Indians, old Triumphs, and heavy custom builds that looked welded together from war and memory. Some wore black leather darkened by years of weather. Some had fresh patches stitched with names that meant nothing to the townspeople and everything to the men wearing them. They were not smiling. They were not celebrating. They were standing witness. And because people cannot resist a spectacle they fear, Black Hollow began gathering at a distance. Across the street, inside the diner, every stool facing the windows filled before the coffee had finished brewing. On the sidewalk by the pharmacy, shopkeepers stood with crossed arms pretending they were only there to open early. At second-floor windows above Main, curtains shifted. Phones came out. Photos were taken. Videos too. The sheriff's department parked 2 cruisers at the corner and then wisely did very little except maintain a visible presence and pray none of the old laws of pride got activated by the new laws of attention. But there was no riot. No march. No shouted declaration. The riders stood in the cold morning light with the patience of men who had not come to perform fear for strangers. They had come for a boy in a hospital bed. Inside the hospital, Noah woke slowly to pain and distant vibration. At first he thought he was dreaming. Then he opened his eyes and found Ruth in the chair again, sleeping in stiff angles with one hand still wrapped around her purse strap as if vigilance could continue unconsciously. The room held that peculiar early morning hospital stillness, a dim light, a low monitor tone, the soft wheels of distant carts. Then he heard it again. Not one engine. Many. Far enough away to blur into a continuous tremor, close enough to reach the glass. He frowned. Ruth stirred almost immediately, as grandmothers do, sensing wakefulness like a pressure shift in the room. "You're up. What's that sound?" Her expression did something strange then, half disbelief, half exasperation, with a layer of reluctant awe underneath. "Apparently," she said, voice dry from lack of sleep, "that sound is your poor judgment acquiring an escort." Noah blinked. Then the door opened and the answer arrived in the form of Lily. She burst in carrying a paper bag, a juice bottle, and a level of excitement that somehow coexisted with the remains of yesterday's fear. Her hair was brushed this time, though badly, and she wore the determined look of a child who had decided the hospital now belonged to her emotionally if not legally. "You have to see," she said before even greeting him. "Good morning to you too. Dad says not to yell in here, but you have to see." Ruth gave Noah a look that said this was already out of hand. Noah tried to sit up too quickly, winced hard enough to suck air through his teeth, and immediately regretted every life choice that led to this motion. "Easy," Ruth snapped, already reaching to help. "I'm fine." "No, you're 17 and male. Those are different." Lily came to the bedside and practically vibrated. "There are so many." "So many what?" "Bikers." Noah stared at her. Then at Ruth. Then back. Ruth sighed. "Your friend Mr. Mercer has turned the hospital exterior into a military parade designed by bad decisions." Noah looked toward the window, but from the angle of the bed he could only see a strip of pale sky. Lily set the juice down and lowered her voice dramatically. "By dawn, they were everywhere. That sentence would be repeated for years, with embellishment, but in that moment it was simply true enough to unsettle him. Why? Lily looked genuinely baffled by the question. Because you saved me. Noah opened his mouth, closed it, and tried again. That doesn't explain 100 motorcycles. Ruth muttered, no, dear. It only explains why there weren't 200. Before Noah could respond, Zeke appeared in the doorway. He had not slept. That much was obvious. He stood with coffee in one hand and a face carved from fatigue, but his posture held the same dangerous steadiness as always. Today, though, there was something else in it too, an odd restraint, as if the presence of so many brothers outside made him even more careful inside. He nodded at Ruth first, then Noah. You awake enough to move? Noah narrowed his eyes. That depends on whether you're asking medically or stupidly. The corner of Zeke's mouth moved. Window. Wheelchair. 5 minutes. Ruth shot him a look. He is not a parade float. No, Zeke said quietly. He's the reason they're here. Noah looked between them. His shoulder throbbed with every heartbeat. He was tired, medicated, stitched, and in no condition to process being the center of anything. But curiosity won, as it often does when pain and absurdity meet. Okay, he said. 10 minutes later, with a nurse's reluctant permission and Ruth's protective supervision, Noah was eased into a wheelchair and rolled to a wide observation window at the end of the corridor overlooking the front lot. What he saw stopped him cold. Motorcycles. Rows and rows of them. Chrome flashing in the weak morning sun. Black frames. Low handlebars. Windshields marked by miles and weather. Men in leather standing beside them in disciplined clusters, hats off or heads bowed or arms folded across broad chests. Some were talking quietly. Most were simply waiting. Waiting for news. Waiting because someone had to make visible what the town would otherwise reduce to gossip, that a boy had taken a bullet protecting one of their own, and that act meant something. Noah stared so long the nurse actually softened. Quite a turnout, she murmured. He could not answer. Below, in the front row nearest the entrance, several riders noticed movement at the upper window. One pointed. Heads lifted. Then, without signal Noah could see, the entire first line removed their gloves and placed one hand over the chest patch of their cuts. Not a cheer. Not applause. Respect. The gesture rippled backward through the gathered riders like wine through dark grass. Row after row. 100 men, maybe more, standing beneath the hospital windows with one hand over their colors for a boy from a hardware store who had refused to let a child be taken. Noah's throat tightened unexpectedly. He had grown up mostly unnoticed. Poor kids often do. They become part of the town's scenery, helpful when useful, invisible when not, spoken about more than listened to. Even at school, Noah had learned to occupy little space. Work, grades, errands, keep moving. Don't become trouble. Don't become burden. Don't expect witness. Now 100 feared men were standing outside because he had mattered. It was almost too much to interpret. Beside him, Ruth went very quiet. Lily looked proud enough to combust. Zeke said nothing at all. Noah swallowed hard. This is insane. Yeah, Zeke said. It is. You did this? Zeke's gaze stayed on the lot below. I made one call. The rest is because word travels. Noah looked at him. You told them all to come? No. The answer came low and firm. I told one chapter what you did. By morning, they decided for themselves. That somehow meant more. Not obligation. Choice. Noah looked back down. In the second row he recognized one of the men from the hospital hallway the night before, a thick-shouldered rider with a broken nose and graying braid. The man happened to glance up, saw Noah at the glass, and touched 2 fingers to his temple in salute. Another man did the same. Then another. Noah let out a slow breath that shook on the way out. Ruth cleared her throat. "Well," she said, voice unsteady in spite of the attempt at dryness, "you've certainly complicated college applications." Lily laughed for the first time since the shooting, and the sound loosened something in the whole group. The story should have ended there for most people. Boy gets hurt, bikers show up, town gapes, legend is born. But real endings are messier. They ask what comes after the image. What follows the visible loyalty? What damage keeps moving beneath the dramatic moment? For Noah, the days after the shooting were harder than the story allowed. The physical recovery was manageable, according to doctors. The bullet had passed clean through the upper shoulder without hitting bone or major vessels. Painful, yes. Dangerous, yes. But survivable with time, dressings, medication, and rest. People love the word lucky after violence, because it makes horror sound mathematically resolved. Noah heard it from everyone, nurses, deputies, townspeople, even the local pastor. Lucky. Fortunate. Blessed. He accepted it because arguing required more energy than he had. But at night, when the hospital dimmed and Ruth dozed and the machines kept time around him, he relived the alley. The jammed gate. The footsteps. The gun coming up. Sometimes in the dream he moved too slowly. Sometimes Lily did. Sometimes the shot hit her. Sometimes Zeke arrived 1 second later and the whole scene turned black before it ended. Noah would wake with his heart slamming so hard it hurt the wound, his shirt damp with sweat, his mouth dry with panic. Once, just before dawn, a nurse found him sitting upright and shaking with the sort of silent terror that embarrasses boys more than pain ever does. When Zeke visited that morning, he took one look and knew. "You sleep?" Noah shrugged. "Bad?" Another shrug. Zeke sat down in the chair beside the bed, leaning forward with forearms on his knees. For a while he said nothing, which Noah appreciated more than comfort. Finally Zeke asked, "You see it every time?" Noah glanced at him. "Yeah." Zeke nodded once, unsurprised. "That'll happen." "You too?" That question hung in the air. Zeke's gaze drifted to the window. "Long time." Noah studied him. "You ever fix it?" Zeke rubbed a thumb over split knuckles. "No." "Then, after a beat, you learn how not to let it own the room." Noah let that sit with him. It was not reassurance. It was something better. The town, meanwhile, was changing shape around them. Something about the public image of the iron vultures at the hospital unsettled the old stories people told. Fear still existed, fear has long roots, but now it had competition. Curiosity. Respect. Confusion. The same men once dismissed as thugs had stood guard outside a hospital all night for a local kid. They had not threatened staff. They had not broken windows. They had not made speeches. They had brought flowers for Ruth, awkwardly, from a grocery store floral section that looked shocked by the purchase. One of them paid Noah's initial pharmacy bill without leaving a name. Another fixed the broken hinge on the hospital's side gate because it squeaked and someone decided squeaking was disrespectful. No one knew what to do with that. At the diner, arguments started. "They're still criminals," one man insisted over eggs. "Maybe," replied the barber, "but when my nephew was in that ICU after the factory accident, nobody parked outside for him." At church, the pastor gave an oblique sermon about unexpected instruments of mercy and immediately regretted it when half the congregation demanded clarification after service. On Main Street, people who had once crossed away from Zeke Mercer now nodded first. He seemed to hate that almost as much as he hated being thanked. The Red Knives, for their part, did not get the chance to escalate. The surviving gunman was placed under guard. The other 2 attackers began making statements as soon as they realized exactly whose daughter they had targeted and how publicly the attempt had failed. Law enforcement, suddenly motivated by the social pressure of a town on edge and a biker alliance visibly mobilized, moved with rare efficiency. Safe houses were raided across the county line. Stolen weapons were recovered. 2 more arrests followed within 48 hours. A rival territory war that might have spilled further into Black Hollow was cut off before it could properly ignite. Again, people credited the sheriff. The sheriff, privately, credited the fact that he had never seen so many armed men choose discipline at once and understood the alternative too well to be lazy. 3 days after the shooting, Noah was discharged. By then the crowd outside the hospital had thinned, but not vanished. When Ruth wheeled him toward the exit, he found riders still there, fewer now, maybe 20, but enough to line the walkway in 2 quiet rows. No spectacle, no engines revving. Just presence. Lily came running as soon as the doors opened, checked herself midway because she remembered the shoulder, and instead took his hand carefully. "You're out." That's generally how discharge works. She ignored that. Dad made soup. Noah looked toward Zeke, who stood by the curb near Ruth's old sedan. "That sounds like a threat." Zeke deadpanned, "It is." "You're eating it." Ruth, already overwhelmed by the logistics of medication schedules, follow-ups, and town curiosity, pinched the bridge of her nose. "I don't know whether I'm taking him home or handing him over to organized leather." "You're taking him home," Noah said. Lily looked disappointed. "But our couch is bigger." Ruth muttered, "That is not a sentence I ever expected from a biker's child." Before they could load him into the car, the gray-braided rider Noah had noticed from the window stepped forward. He removed his glove and offered his hand with grave formality. "Name's Cutter." Noah shifted awkwardly and took it. Cutter nodded once. "You ever need anything on the road, you say your name and ours." "Understood." Noah frowned. "I'm not in your club." Cutter's weathered face barely changed. "Didn't say you were." "Said your name matters to us." He stepped back. Another rider repeated the handshake. Then another. Not all of them, there were too many for that, and Noah was too sore, but enough to make the point. These men were not recruiting him. They were marking him as protected. The distinction mattered. When he finally got into Ruth's car, Black Hollow watched from every available angle. And so the second life of the story began. At home above the hardware store, recovery developed its own rhythm. Ruth enforced medicine times with military precision. Noah pretended he didn't need help with shirts that pulled over the wrong side. Lily visited almost every day after school, bringing library books, gossip, and wildly inaccurate retellings of the event that grew more heroic on Noah's part each time. In one version he had fought all 3 men before the gun ever came out. In another he had jumped through the air like in a movie. Noah objected weakly. She ignored him. Zeke came less often, but each visit meant more. He fixed a loose stair rail without being asked. Replaced the failing lock on Ruth's back door. Had 2 club brothers repair the hardware store's delivery van after noticing the brakes were near death. He never announced these things as payment because he understood that true debts do not vanish under material gestures. But action was his language, and he spoke it relentlessly. One late afternoon, about a week after Noah got home, Zeke found him sitting behind the store on an overturned crate, trying unsuccessfully to one-handedly sand rust off an old bicycle frame. "You're not supposed to be doing that." Noah didn't look up. "I'm not supposed to do a lot of things." Zeke leaned against the brick wall. "Doctor said rest." "Doctor also said move around some." "Not stupidly." That made Noah glance over. "You really enjoy that word." Zeke folded his arms. "Fits you." For a minute they watched the alley behind the store slip toward evening. Someone nearby was frying onions. A train horn moaned in the distance. The ordinary world continued with almost insulting indifference. Then Noah said, "You don't owe me your whole life." Zeke did not answer right away. When he did, his voice had gone quieter than usual. Noah, listen carefully. Men talk wrong about debt because they think it's about balancing numbers. It isn't. He looked at the boy directly. You put yourself between my daughter and a bullet. There's no even after that. There's only what I do next. Noah absorbed that in silence. Zeke continued. What I do next is make sure what happened to you doesn't leave you behind. The words landed with uncomfortable precision. Because beneath the attention, beneath the food deliveries and hospital visits and town legend, a more practical fear had begun creeping into Noah's life. He had missed shifts. Missed school. Physical therapy was coming. Bills too. Ruth had savings only in the way working poor people technically have savings, a number that looks real until anything important happens. Noah hadn't yet spoken the fear aloud because speaking scarcity makes it harder to pretend you can outwork it. Apparently Zeke had seen it anyway. I can manage, Noah said automatically. I know. Zeke pushed off the wall and walked closer. That's why I'm saying this now instead of when you're desperate. He reached into his jacket and set an envelope on the crate beside the bicycle frame. Noah stared at it. No. Yes. No. Zeke's eyes hardened. This isn't charity. What is it then? Responsibility. Noah looked away. Pride rose in him fast and hot, the kind poor people grow like armor because without it everyone starts mistaking your need for permission to own you. I'm not taking club money. Zeke's answer came instantly. Good. Then don't think of it as club money. Noah snapped his head up. What does that mean? For the first time since entering the alley days earlier, Zeke looked almost uncertain. It was such an unnatural expression on him that Noah nearly missed the significance of it. It means, Zeke said slowly, it's mine. Mine and Lily's. For school, bills, whatever Ruth needs. And if that still offends your ego, you can pay it back when you're old enough to have one mortgage and two regrets. Noah stared. The envelope remained between them like a dare. After a long silence, Noah asked, why are you doing this really? Zeke met his eyes without flinching. Because the world doesn't get to use you up for doing the right thing. That broke the argument. Not because Noah wanted to surrender, but because he knew, with painful clarity, that the statement was true. The world used up good people all the time. He had watched it happen to Ruth for years. Work hard, help others, absorb damage quietly, and receive mostly more damage in return. The idea that someone would step in not with pity but with refusal, that this act of courage would not become another private cost borne by a broke family in silence, hit somewhere deeper than pride could guard. Slowly, Noah put down the sandpaper. I'll pay it back, he said. Zeke nodded once. You'll do whatever you want. Later. That might have been the closest thing to tenderness Noah had ever heard from him. The weeks passed. Winter loosened. The bruises yellowed and disappeared. The wound closed into a puckered scar that tugged when Noah moved wrong and would likely ache in cold weather for years. The nightmares became less nightly, then less violent. Lily stopped starting every time a strange car idled too long outside school. Ruth began sleeping through full nights again. Black Hollow settled into a new version of itself, one where the iron vultures were no less formidable, but somehow less abstractly monstrous. People had seen too much that contradicted the old simplifications. Still, not everyone adapted gracefully. There were whispers that Noah had gotten mixed up with dangerous men. Rumors that he'd be wearing colors by summer. A guidance counselor delicately suggested he put some distance between himself and certain influences if he wanted scholarship committees to remain favorable. Noah listened to that speech in silence, then asked whether scholarship committees preferred students who let children get kidnapped instead. The counselor did not enjoy the question. What Noah himself wanted remained unclear even to him. He did not want club life. He admired parts of the brotherhood he had glimpsed, its loyalty, its directness, its refusal to abandon its own, but he had also seen enough of danger growing up to understand that belonging to powerful men often came with costs disguised as pride. He wanted something else. Maybe college. Maybe mechanical engineering. Maybe a life where fixing machines led to better futures than small-town survival. The shooting had not made him hunger for darkness. If anything, it sharpened his desire for a larger life. Zeke seemed relieved by that. One evening in March, as they stood outside Ruth's store watching dusk settle over Main Street, Noah finally asked the question that had been circling since the hospital. "What would have happened," he said, "if I hadn't moved?" Zeke knew exactly what he meant. He stayed looking at the street for a long time before answering. "They would have taken her." Noah nodded once, jaw tight. "And you?" Zeke's expression went flat in a way that made the temperature seem to drop. "I would have found them." Noah believed him instantly. "They know that, don't they?" "Yeah." "Good." Zeke looked at him then, not as a boy, not as a burden, not even as a savior, but as someone who had stepped into a line most men avoid and emerged altered by it. "You're angry," Zeke observed. Noah gave a small humorless laugh. "I got shot. That's not the whole thing." Noah looked down at his scarred shoulder beneath the jacket. "No." Zeke waited. Finally Noah said, "I hate that it happened because people like that think fear belongs to them." He swallowed. "And I hate that for about a second in that alley, they were right." Zeke considered that. Then he said, "Fear belongs to everybody. Courage decides who gets to move while it's in the room." Noah turned that over slowly. It wasn't the kind of sentence that makes a good poster. It was too rough, too true. Which was exactly why it stayed. Spring came fully at last. On a clear Saturday in April, Black Hollow held its annual Founders' Day Fair, a tired little tradition involving booths, pies, student bands, and the town's relentless need to prove it still counted as a community even when most of its young people were planning exits. Usually Zeke Mercer never attended. This year he did. Not with a full contingent. Just with Lily, and at a distance that let townspeople pretend they weren't reorganizing their assumptions in real time. Noah was there too, helping Ruth at a hardware booth with garden tools and discounted seed trays. His arm still wasn't perfect, but it worked. When Lily spotted him, she ran over holding a ribbon from some school contest and immediately launched into a story about winning second place in a history presentation because Mrs. Kellum said my delivery was too aggressive, which is unfair because the revolution was aggressive. Ruth laughed outright. Zeke, standing a few paces back, looked almost peaceful. That was when the mayor approached. He was a nervous little man with polished shoes and the smile of someone who preferred risk only when ceremonial. Noah saw him coming and nearly escaped, but Lily had already spotted him. "He's here for you," she whispered with wicked delight. The mayor cleared his throat in front of the booth. "Mr. Grayson." Noah braced for discomfort. The mayor unfolded a piece of paper. "On behalf of the town of Black Hollow, in recognition of extraordinary courage and selfless action in protecting one of our own." "No," Noah said immediately. Ruth elbowed him hard enough to qualify as generational correction. The mayor pressed on, visibly determined to survive the moment. A small crowd gathered. Too quickly for escape. Noah stood there, scar pulling under his shirt, while the mayor declared him an example of bravery, community spirit, and youth character. The words washed over him strangely. They were kind, and yet he could not entirely connect them to the memory of the alley, which had felt less noble than immediate. Then the mayor handed him a plaque. Noah looked at it like it might bite. Lily clapped like a maniac. The small crowd followed. And just beyond them, not in the center, not demanding attention, stood 6 iron vultures, including Zeke, watching with quiet expressions that made clear this mattered to them in a way the town still only half understood. Noah accepted the plaque. He hated plaques. He kept that one. Later that evening, after the booths closed and the square emptied and Ruth finally stopped rearranging the same cash box for the 10th time, Noah walked out behind the store and found Zeke there beside the motorcycles. Not 100 this time. Just 2. Zeke's black Harley and a smaller used bike beside it, older but restored, matte blue with fresh tires and clean lines. Noah frowned. What's that? Zeke did not pretend innocence. Transportation. I have transportation. You have a bicycle and denial. Noah stared at the bike. No. Yes. No. Zeke gave him a look. You really only have 3 words in these conversations. I'm not taking a motorcycle from you. You're not taking it. I'm giving it. That's worse. Zeke folded his arms. It's legal, registered, and slow enough that if you kill yourself on it, it'll be from poor judgment rather than horsepower. Noah almost smiled despite himself. Why? Zeke shrugged once, too casually. Because you like engines. Because town's bigger when you're broke. Because your shoulder'll heal but the bus schedule won't. Then his expression shifted, grew quieter. Because not everything people leave after blood has to be bad. The sentence hit like a soft blow. Noah looked at the bike again. It wasn't flashy. That made it worse, somehow. It meant thought. Observation. The kind that cannot be dismissed as guilt spending itself loudly. He stepped closer and ran his fingers lightly over the handlebar. You really don't do normal thank yous. Zeke's gaze went toward the sky darkening over the alley. Never learned. Noah nodded once. Then he said the thing he had been circling for months without naming. You know I'm not joining. Zeke looked at him as if the idea were almost insulting. I know. Noah turned. And that doesn't bother you? Noah. Zeke's voice carried that grounded weight that left no room for uncertainty. You saved my daughter. I want you alive, educated, and somewhere better than this town if that's what you choose. I don't need you wearing my patch to mean something to me. For a moment neither of them moved. Then Noah gave a small, rough exhale that might have become emotion if he'd let it. Okay, he said. That was how the bike became his. Summer arrived cleaner than the last one. Lily grew taller. Ruth's store did slightly better after townspeople started intentionally buying local in a wave of civic sentiment no one fully admitted was connected to the shooting. Noah finished the school year with strong enough grades to earn a partial scholarship to a technical college 2 counties over, close enough to commute on the bike if weather allowed. When the acceptance letter came, Ruth cried openly into the kitchen towel. Lily announced that this meant he was, basically famous and smart now. Zeke read the letter twice, grunted once, and then organized an impromptu cookout behind Ruth's store that somehow included 2 grills, 18 bikers, 3 folding tables, and the best ribs Black Hollow had ever accidentally hosted. It was there, in the middle of laughter and smoke and children playing tag between parked bikes, that Noah realized the final truth of what had happened to him. He had not merely been wounded saving a biker's daughter. He had been claimed, not owned, not recruited, not absorbed, but claimed in the oldest and strangest sense. Seen. Remembered. Entered permanently into the protective circle of people the world had taught others to fear. And in turn, they had become something more complicated than rumor in his own life. Dangerous, yes. Capable of violence, certainly. But also loyal in ways the respectable world often only pretended to be. As the sun dropped and the string lights Ruth had hung years earlier flickered on above the alley, Lily climbed onto a crate and banged a spoon against a bottle for attention. Everyone, improbably, quieted. She stood there missing one front tooth, chin high, as if born to address outlaw assemblies. I have something to say. Zeke rubbed a hand over his face. This should be illegal. Lily ignored him. She pointed the spoon at Noah. You got hurt saving me. Noah immediately looked uncomfortable. Great start. And by morning, she continued loudly, 100 bikers came because of you. A murmur of amused agreement rolled through the group. Lily lifted her chin higher. So I think that means your family. Silence followed. Not awkward. Heavy. Real. Noah looked at Zeke. Zeke looked back. Then, in front of Ruth, the club, the summer evening, and whatever old ghost still watched from the edges of all their lives, Zeke Mercer gave one slow nod. Yeah, he said. It does. That was the conclusion Black Hollow never would have predicted when the story began. Not revenge. Not gang war. Not a town burned down by biker justice. Something stranger and harder and better. A boy who had every reason to mind his own business chose not to. A feared biker discovered there are debts that cannot be repaid, only honored. A little girl learned that courage does not always look like strength, sometimes it looks like someone else stepping forward because they cannot bear for you to be harmed. And an entire town, against habit and prejudice and all the easier stories, was forced to witness what loyalty looked like when it arrived wearing leather and grief and gratitude. Years later, people would still tell it wrong. They would exaggerate the number of riders. Change the street. Add knives where there had only been fists. Make Noah braver, Zeke crueler, Lily smaller, the danger cleaner. That is what happens when stories become local legend. They get polished until the jagged truths are easier to hold. But those who had truly been there remembered better. They remembered the gate catching. The crack of the gun. The blood on winter pavement. The biker kneeling in the street with his hands pressed over a boy's wound. The hospital lot at dawn, full of engines cooling under pale light. And above all, they remembered the part that made the whole story matter. He got hurt saving the biker's daughter. By morning, 100 bikers came to repay the debt. And in the end, they never really could. Because some debts are larger than money, louder than vengeance, and stronger than fear. Some debts become family.